Hey, what's up, everybody? True Boxing here. Thank you for coming back to get hit with the truth. So, today doing the why video on Canelo and what Canelo did with this new deal that he struck with Matchroom and DAZN for potentially 3 fights that are all supposed to take place this year. Canelo decided on $160 million deals. Now, this is a proposed deal. That will see him fight Dimitri Bivol in May, and then fight Triple G for a 3rd time in September, and then he would finish it off in December. Right now, there's no concrete opponent locked in, but I think there's a variety of different opponents. I'll get into who I think he should take, but let's start with the fights in order. Let's go with Dimitri Bivol. So why did he decide on fighting Dimitri Bivol? Well, Dimitri Bivol is the undefeated WBA light heavyweight champion of the world. Canelo eventually is going to be officially at light heavyweight. That's probably going to be the division he remains at for his career, to be honest. I think if we're looking at Canelo finishing his career, very likely it's going to be at 175 light heavyweight. So he wants to strike now and fight the best in the division as of right now. And right now, Dimitri Bivol is number 2, and you could up until like his last fight, his last couple fights, but especially Arthur Beterbiev, the number 1 guy, you could argue Bivol for number 1. Personally, on my top 10, personally, my top 10 for light heavyweight coming into 2021, I had Bivol slightly ahead of Arthur Beterbiev. Beterbiev knocked out Marcus Brown. Bivol didn't look fantastic in his last fight. So, against Umar Shumanov, really dominated the action and just, you know, there was no, it was underwhelming. Let's just say that. That's the right term for it. But, you know, be that as it may, I liked Bivol for number 1 prior to that. And now he's number 2. And again, you can argue him for the top spot, you know, based on resumes with Beterbiev. But that's what I'm saying is Dimitri Bivol provides such a challenge, technically sound. To me, he's the most dangerous fight of, let's say, whoever he fights in the 3rd fight of this contract. There's been rumors of possibly Ilunga Makabu at cruiserweight, even John Ryder. We know he's fighting Bivol, Triple G, and let's look at the 3 biggest names that didn't get the fight: Charlo, Andrade, and David Benavidez. I'll tell you right now, I think Bivol is the most dangerous fight of all those guys, because I think Bivol has the chin to take the shots of Canelo shots, and he's so technically sound and gifted boxing-wise that he might be good enough to outbox Canelo. You know, and that would be an impressive feat right there. You know, I'm going into this fight going, this is not a lock. This is probably the most concerned for Canelo's rise, you know, a reign at the top that I've been since the rematch with Triple G, to be honest with you. I figured that Canelo was going to beat Daniel Jacobs. I figured that Canelo was going to beat Sergey Kovalev. Every other guy, nobody's really worried me. I'm like, okay, you know, maybe Callum Smith a little bit because of his size, but I don't know. I just had a confidence about me that Canelo was going to win, and I still have that confidence, but it's not as much going into this fight with Bivol. They're fighting at light heavyweight. That's Bivol's weight. He's been there for the last 4 or 5 years. He's used to that. He's comfortable. He's a defending world champion, and all he's been wanting is a big fight. He's beaten good fighters. He beat and dominated them. Bivol rarely loses a round. He pitches shutouts almost every time he goes out there. Now, he lacks in the punching power department, I'll give you that, but he punches hard enough, you know, to where if he put his foot on the gas pedal a little bit more, he probably gets a lot of his opponents out there, much the way he did against Sullivan Barrera years ago. He picked Barrera apart and stopped him in the 12th round. That was impressive. Joe Smith Jr., he hurt Joe Smith in the late rounds and almost stopped him. You know, so Bivol hits hard enough to keep you honest. Do I think he can hurt Canelo? Not likely. But you never know with a perfectly timed shot. And Canelo's moving up to challenge this guy. To me, this was huge. This is a huge, you know, opponent to go after. And I'll tell you right now, why Dimitri Bivol? Because he holds a light heavyweight title. That's why. Dimitri Bivol holds a piece of the crown that Canelo wants, as Canelo is in search of becoming undisputed in another weight class. And Arthur Beterbiev and Joe Smith Jr., the other two champions, they're unifying 3 belts in June. So that all plays into this. You know, Canelo can grab a hold of the light heavyweight title. He can move back down to fight Triple G. And then after that, you know, he can move up to cruiserweight and then maybe move back down to 175 and go after the undisputed title next May, probably against Arthur Beterbiev. You know, so this all makes sense right here. You know, Canelo, he chose Bivol for a reason. Bivol's tough. He's a good fighter. You know, years ago when Canelo took on Kovalev, some of the detractors were like, oh, Kovalev's too old. Why doesn't he fight Bivol? Why doesn't he fight Beterbiev? You know? Well, now he's fighting Bivol. So, you know, there should be no excuses for that. And he's loading up to fight Beterbiev. And I'm telling you, that's a super fight right there. Beterbiev stays undefeated this year. He'll be 20-0 with 20 knockouts if he stays undefeated. If he stops Joe Smith, which I think he will, and if he stops Anthony Yard later in the year, which I think he will, he'll be 20-0 with 20 knockouts. And the #1 light heavyweight in the world, and Canelo would be running smack dab into him. So that's huge. So Canelo fighting Bivol, there's a reason, and it's gonna load up for Canelo to become undisputed at 175. That's why he's fighting Dimitri Bivol. Now, why Triple G in September? Triple G is the likely opponent. Now, Triple G, one, has to get by Ryota Murata in their projected unification bout that's taking place at later in the year, in the next couple months, I'm hoping. I'll tell you why Triple G. Because this rivalry needs a close. It needs an ending. And people who knock Canelo can destroy destroy Canelo all they want about how Triple G is 40 years old. But here's the thing. He is the #1 fighter at middleweight. If he beats Murata, he'll unify belts at middleweight and leave no doubt that he's the #1 guy. So if you have questions right now about Andre, Charlo, if Triple G beats Murata, he'll hold 2 of the 4 belts. And he'll move right back ahead of Andre and Charlo. If you have him behind, I still have him ahead because of his resume, what he's done. You know, the fact that he's gave Canelo hell in both fights just 3 years ago. So people can knock, you know, Triple G, this fight all they want, but Canelo needed an ending. And DAZN wanted to get everything out of Triple G that they could in their contract that they signed with him. So they paid a lot of money to get this 3rd fight to happen. And people are going to be interested. And again, if Triple G comes out even at 40 and looks good, then what's the difference? He's still the top dog at 160, whether he's 40 or not. That's my thing. You know, Bernard Hopkins at 49 fought Sergey Kovalev to determine the #1 guy at light heavyweight, and nobody made a big deal about that. Why? Because he was the best. Age does not matter. Floyd Mayweather, when he fought Canelo, you know, people say, well, Canelo wasn't ready. I'm in that department, but here's the thing, ready or not, Floyd was, and you know, the Mayweather fans will go, oh, Floyd was 36 when they fought. And I'm like, well, Floyd was still the best at 147 when they fought. So, and people were still calling him the pound-for-pound king. So what does it matter how old he is if they're in their prime? I just had this debate on Facebook on one of my boxing groups the other day about your prime. Canelo doesn't fight fighters in his prime, in their primes. He's fighting the best fighters in the division, though. Does it matter if they're in their primes or not? Why is that Canelo's fault? You know? And that's the point I'm making is, you know, prime, you can argue that. That's an argument. That's based on opinion. But it's a fact that Canelo's fighting the best fighters in their respective divisions. Or he's fighting undefeated fighters who are champions, like Caleb Plant, Billy Joe Saunders. I didn't have those guys ranked 1 or 2 or 3. I had him like 4, 5, 6 in that area when Canelo fought then. Callum Smith was number 1 in the division though when Canelo came up and beat him. Callum Smith was the number 1 super middleweight in the world. So what? You know, people want to knock the Abney Yildirim fight. Well, hey, Abney Yildirim, that was a fight he had to take, you know, at some point. So he got it out of the way because Yildirim was a mandatory for the WBC belt. He was in the way of Canelo being undisputed. Billy Joe Saunders, like I said, 2-division world champ. Knock it all you want, but Canelo's fighting undefeated, solid-ass fighters. Caleb Plant, undefeated. A lot of people thought he was going to beat Canelo. He was going to outbox him. You know, the thing is Canelo keeps winning, and people can't take it, and so they want to knock what he's doing every little fight. You know, every down to the smallest hair, they want to split those hairs apart and, you know, criticize and criticize and criticize. Well, there's a major reason why Triple G. There's not a bigger name between 160 and 200 pounds for Canelo to fight unless Alexander Usyk comes down to cruiserweight and meets Canelo at a catchweight for a fight. Outside of that, the Triple G fight is the biggest fight for Canelo to take worldwide. And again, it needs an ending. And we're going to get one in September. So, you know, I'm excited for that. Now, what possible opponents could Canelo be taking on in December? And I really think it's possible, even though I don't want to see him and Makabu, I think it's possible he fights Makabu, and I'll tell you why. Because Makabu holds a cruiserweight title, and this is Canelo trying to make history, moving up and winning a championship in a 5th weight class. You know, he would become the first Mexican ever to accomplish that feat. 5 weight classes and being a world champion. That's a big deal for Canelo, and he wants to get it. Check that off his list. And why not? He's all about legacy and history, and he's got the deal locked in place. I want him to fight him. I really don't want to see him fight John Ryder. I really think that's a waste of time. I hope, you know, I know his name was mentioned. I hope that's not possible. I would love him and Arthur Beterbiev to fight for the undisputed title as soon as possible. And if that fight could be worked out for December, great. I'm leaning towards the less likely because Beterbiev, after Joe Smith, he has a mandatory due. You know, the winner of Smith and Beterbiev have a mandatory due against Anthony Yard of the United Kingdom. He's a WBO mandatory #1 contender right now. So that mandatory is going to be due in the second half of the year. So I'm looking at it like, let Canelo do his thing, move up to cruiserweight, win a championship there, and maybe possibly Canelo moves back down in May of next year to 175 and fights for the undisputed light heavyweight title. That makes sense. So Canelo is making, you know, this contract makes a lot of sense. Not just because of the money, but hey, the money's fucking ridiculous. $53.3 million per fight if he's making $160 million for these 3 fights. That's what it breaks down to. $53.3 million per fight. That is insane. So, you know, I just, you have to applaud Canelo, you know, all the criticism and all that he's taken for not fighting Charlo, Benavidez, Andrade. You know, I'm sorry. These fights make more sense for his legacy. They're more challenging fights. And it makes sense. And if you want to argue that, go back. I'll tell you, I have 3 separate videos of why not Charlo, why not Benavidez, and why not Andrade that you can go view. And I answer all the questions as to why he didn't fight any of those guys. So that's it. That's what I got. That's the Canelo Matchroom deal and my breakdown of it. Hope you guys enjoyed it. True Boxing. You've been hit with the truth.